when you think about technology at work, you might picture efficiency, data, better decision making. But what happens when those same tools, like productivity trackers and AI decision making and remote monitoring, start to quietly chip away at the trust, culture, and safety we've built? In today's episode of The Hard Skills, we're asking, how do leaders protect workplace trust in an era when technology can just as easily erode as it can enhance it? We are kicking off season 9 when we're focusing on strengthening workplace culture. And I literally cannot think of a better focus than this talk today. And before I introduce my guest, one thing I want to mention before we start, and I'll be kind of reminding folks along the way, is that this fall, my TowerScope Leadership Academy is kicking off a new program, their Strategic Leadership Resiliency Fellows Program. It's specifically tailored to develop the hard skills muscles to navigate today's uncertainty and disruption. And there are 2 options that we're offering. One is a shorter term virtual half-day workshop called the Anti-Burnout Lab. The Anti-Burnout Leadership Lab is on October 9th from 12 to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, focused on getting grounded, mitigating burnout, and finding resilience. And the second option is called the Strategic Leadership Resiliency Accelerator, and it's more comprehensive, a 5-week program from October 16th to November 20th from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern. And it's focused on learning everything in my strategic leadership pathway model in order to go from grounded to growth, navigating complexity, team dynamics, and culture change. Or you can get them as a bundle for less. So to access them, get on my newsletter, because that's when I'm announcing it first. And you get on my newsletter by going to gotowerscope.com and subscribing. Or you can follow me on LinkedIn, where I'm going to be posting on it later on after I open it up to newsletter subscribers. Registration starts now and ends September 29th, so look for it. All right, with all of that said, let me introduce our guest today. And I should start by saying that normally I cut people's bios down just to get the most critical parts for why they're on the show. But Dr. Stockdale's background is so rich, there's literally no fluff to cut. So I want you to hear it all, okay? Dr. Cameron Stockdale, which he let me call him Cam, okay, is an internationally recognized leader in organizational behavior, workplace wellness, and change leadership. He's the former CEO of the Work Wellness Institute and currently serves as the chair of the International Leadership Association's Healthcare Leadership Community, which is how he and I met and connected, and also vice chair of the Executive Health and Safety Council of British Columbia. He has over 25 years of experience in emergency health services, offering both a practical and policy-informed perspective to the intersection of health, leadership, and innovation. His doctoral degree is in interdisciplinary leadership. He also has a Master's of Laws in Innovation and Technology, a Master's of Arts in Leadership, and a postgraduate certificate in organizational behavior from Harvard. Dr. Stockdale also holds both national and provincial appointments advising Canadian governments on workplace policy and legislative change. His current research explores how emerging technologies influence psychological safety, legal accountability, and leadership practices in modern workplaces undergoing rapid transformation. So with that, welcome to the show, Cam.
You make it sound more impressive than it actually is.
No way. It is absolutely as impressive as it sounds.
Well, thank you very much. And when you invited me on your podcast, I went and listened to a few episodes. And besides your intro music being burned in my brain now, you had some amazing guests. And, I just hope I could live up to the bar that they've already set. So thank you.
You will, 100%. I already know it. Okay, so let's start with just your CEO experience itself, because you were in a leadership role, and I'm always interested in learning how people think about these leadership skills when they're practicing it, right? So you, in your CEO role, you led a full-scale digital transformation of this organization. So I'm curious, what did you implement? How did you decide to implement it? And what did you learn about that experience that led you to how you think about the intermix right now of psychological safety, ethics, law, and transparency?
Maybe a little context for your listeners
Yeah.
listening. So, the Work Wellness Institute, we were a non-profit research institute. And what we did is we actually looked at things like the 4-day work week or hybrid work environments. Like how do you actually manage and lead those? And then we would do the knowledge mobilization piece. So a podcast or a webinar or courses, and we developed it depending on the audience. The organization's 40 years old now. I think this year it turns
Mm.
40. I just retired in March, so quite happy to have
Congratulations.
I'm going to say easy street. But the interesting thing about the organization was that before me, it had one CEO, and they were very much in love with technology. But I walked into the organization, and they had its own servers. I mean, we could run our own internet. There were legacy systems that didn't bolt together. And I think when I walked in as the CEO, what I said was what most people do. And you look at it and you say, this is a problem. Let's implement that fix to the problem, right? You have a hammer. What is it? It's a nail, and you're going to hit it. Um, and I realized very, very quickly that that's the wrong approach. That you have to look at it from a more holistic perspective. You have to look at it from a very systems wide perspective. So I really had to slow down and just take a breath and realize that what we were trying to implement here was it was a human issue more so than a technological issue. The technology's there, right? You just have to know how to put the nuts and bolts together. But I sat there and I thought I'm supposed to be this change management expert, and I was just kind of rushing forward and saying, "Hey, listen, let's bring these new systems in," and taking a step back and really understanding that there was a human element that needed to sort of work on this. Um, we adapt technology in pockets or projects without that human oversight. And what I learned very quickly is that we were a very dispersed organization. We had a main office in the lower mainland of British Columbia, and we had staff that were working in Manitoba.
Mm.
And that came with a bunch of issues when we were implementing technology. They're isolated, right? So you think about, and I think it was Jeffrey Pfeiffer that coined the term something around like the bathroom effect, where people who are close to information and power, they sort of gain that information and power, um, and taking that into consideration. I did something very interesting at one time. I had to look at people's workspaces, and there's some workers' compensation rules and regulations here in the province. And it was like we did sort of like a hey, show us your workspace and a decoration in a social setting. And one of my staff members had emptied out their closet and was working in a closet, four white walls, closely cramped. And I was wondering why she had issues, being siloed and isolated. And I thought, you know, it, implementing technology is a human issue as much as it is a technical issue. And we have to move from that kind of everything's a nail and it's a technological hammer that you hit it with. So. Did
Yeah.
I answer your question or did I work
Yeah.
around it?
Yeah. No, I really appreciate um, most of the time, absolutely, we do not think about it as a human issue. We think um, we're now going to install Microsoft Teams for everybody. And everyone will just need to be trained on how to use it, and that's it. And that isn't necessarily that's the end of it. That's not the start of it. So I would love to hear more examples of like if you're going to when you were in this role and you started implementing and you started realizing, okay, this is a human issue. One of the things I heard you say is that you actually went to visit people and see how they experienced their interactions with the organization, and that told you something. I'd love to hear a few more examples like that. And what did it tell you about how much you had to be thinking about the people side of this change in order to feel successful, not just with the final implementation, but even leading up to it?
Yeah, I think the obvious thing is you just can't hand people a tool and say, go and use it, right? And basic instruction. Uh, there's more to it. I made the mistake, and it was a very honest mistake. I had worked for another organization prior to taking over the CEO role. It was project management software, and I brought that project management software in and said, here you go, here's the tool, go and use it. Never thinking about values of the organization, never
Mm,
thinking about values of the people that were going to use the tool, for example. I looked at it from this is going to make things more efficient, and it didn't, right? I'm going to bring it back to healthcare for a minute, and I'll give you another example there. I did a lot of research and change in healthcare. Uh, and unless you tie the changes that you're making in healthcare to the values that the staff has, chances are it's going to fail.
hmm
So if you can tie it to better patient care, for example, even in a unionized environment, a difficult environment, uh, they're more likely to adopt it. And I think that's one of the sort of the things that I learned. I implemented this project management tool. It didn't fit with how people worked, and it ended up not being that much. It wasn't more efficient at the end of the day. I didn't listen to people and what they were saying. I just thought, well, it worked there. It's going to work here. Best practice isn't always best practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I can resonate as an employee recipient in the past of these kinds of changes. I am the kind of person, and many people are like me, who need to know why we're implementing something and needs to know how it will make my life better and why I should switch from what I'm already using. And that piece, that sort of friction around inertia. Like, I'm using my thing, I know my thing. Why should I have to learn something new? Is a big part of the human part of change. And if it's a real steep learning curve, it better be worth it to me, right? So, all of this stuff that you're describing is about how people even choose to try to learn something new when it doesn't feel of value to have to work that hard to learn something new when their old thing is working just fine.
I think the scary thing is if you don't provide them with enough information, they usually fill that information in with negative thoughts and negative perspectives, making your job that much more difficult. So in change, we always hear about over communicate, but over communicate in different ways, different channels, different methods, uh, and fill in the blanks for people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And because otherwise you're right, we will fill in the blanks ourselves. And it's usually with
Yeah.
negative information to prove to ourselves why we shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Right.
It's one of the issues I often have with these change management models. So, we hear these numbers about things, how often it fails. I think my big concern is that change management models often take the perspective that change is going to be perceived as positive. And it's not
Mm,
always positive in organizations. Sometimes, no matter what you do, it's going to be perceived as negative. So how as a leader do you mitigate those sort of negative thoughts, negative perspectives for the team that you're dealing with?
yeah, absolutely. Um, we are nearing an ad break. When we come back, I'd love to add the sort of second and third pieces to all of this, which is you think a lot about the legal implications, the ethical implications, in addition to the change management implications of tech, um, and the trust factor too. So I'd love to start digging into that when we come back. You are listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Cam Stockdale. The Hard Skills is sponsored by TowerScope, my leadership and team development consulting firm. You can learn more about it at gotowerscope.com. The Hard Skills Show live streams on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're here right now, we're on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, through talkradio.nyc, and we will be right back in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a purpose-driven individual looking for deeper healing, clarity, and growth? Welcome to the Expansion Room, a transformative space for purpose-driven individuals. I'm Siobhan Larice, host, licensed therapist, and coach. Join me every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Cameron Stockdale. Before we get into kind of the interaction of all of this with trust building, implications for culture, legal and ethical implications, there is one additional aspect about the change management piece that I'm curious about, and that is gig workers. With the increasing number of people that want to piece together their work life. And those people are not officially embedded in one system. They're working for multiple systems, usually, and often part-time too. Are there additional changes that you've seen to how we do change management when implementing new technology that we haven't been thinking about?
Yeah, I've done a couple of research studies on the gig economy in the last little while. I did one with people with disabilities working in the gig economy and that sort of unsecure work and financial stress that comes along with it. And I've done one recently with rideshare drivers, actually. And, it's from a psychological safety perspective, how are they functioning? And I did that in Western Canada. And kind of the results of that were, I thought, really interesting in that, technology to most people, when I've been doing the research, the platforms, they're this black box of, they don't know how it works. It doesn't matter how it's explained, doesn't matter how that the process of getting the ride or surge pricing or those kind of things, there is always this suspicion about it. There's always this issue of I'm being monitored. It monitors how I drive. It monitors, how much I'm making. It doesn't allow me to make the money that I need to make. And so there's a lot of issues around the explanation of technology, and the perception is reality at the end of the day. They feel stress because of this algorithmic kind of boss that they have. And you see that throughout the research on the gig economy. I would say that at the end of the day that technology is not neutral at all. And there's this assumption that technology is all about productivity. But what keeps coming up and up again is that culture mediates technology at the end of the day. The importance of a culture that you're creating in an organization is it will destroy your organization or you'll have a high performing organization because of it. And in the context of platform gig mediated work, you can understand that culture is a very difficult thing to build. The rideshare drivers that I were interviewing, they really expressed a lot of stress around the fact that they don't really have a community of people that they work with. Every now and then they might talk to another driver, but the discussions that they have with their customers, they feel like they're always being evaluated, right? There's a rate your driver
Mhm.
app, and so they feel like they're always on, they're always under stress. So I think that what's coming out in the research that I was doing and have been doing is just the importance of trying to develop that culture where you're implementing tech and understanding that people in a gig economy feel really isolated. uh, Data is power, and they don't have access to that data. They don't know how it's actually accumulated. They don't know how it's used. They don't even know who holds it. So that black box of the algorithm and what happens with the data and how it's utilized, I think is one of the first steps that in a platform gig economy is something that really needs to be addressed. Because there's lots of thoughts around the inequality of it and the trust factor, as we've talked about before. So.
Fascinating, fascinating. I want to take this in the direction of ethical and legal implications, but I also want to take it in the direction of the cultural aspect. So I'm going to start with culture because that's
Okay.
my area of interest, especially. And I'm curious, we use culture in so many different ways, and we don't always sort of provide a definition. I'd love to hear when you're thinking about the impact on culture and of culture in these environments, including the gig economy experience and just the organization itself, and how it interacts with technology. What are the things that you're looking for? What are those cultural factors that are important key factors?
So I started doing a little bit of work as a consultant after I retired and walking into organizations. And I walk in and the COO or the CEO, says quite proudly, "Hey, we just implemented this technology into the organization. It's wonderful. Our managers, our supervisors, this is how they use it." And I said to them, "Well, that's great, but what you've done is you've implemented a system where people aren't leading. What they're doing is they're managing. Right? We're implementing technology to the point where what we're doing is watching people, we're governing people, using those systems more than we are standing up, walking around and saying, "How was your day?" Which I think from a leadership perspective
Mm.
is much more important. Getting to know your staff, getting to know your employees, what's impacting their day, their organization. I don't think it does any good when a leader or a supervisor, manager, whoever it may be, is sitting in their office or their cubicle, looking at their screens and watching how people work. You know, the project management tool that I was referencing earlier, it ultimately it's kind of useless because like I needed to get up and actually go and say to somebody, "Hey, this is due on Friday. How it's Wednesday today. Are you going to meet your timelines? No? Okay, why not? Let me take the speed bumps out of the way for you." And the systems, the technology that leaders or organizations are implementing this idea of performance and productivity, it's stopping us from being the leaders that I think we need to be to really create those cultures in those high performing teams. So I've literally said to them, like, stand up and go on the shop floor and have a conversation with somebody. And they look and they think, "Well, we implemented the technology so we didn't have to do that." I'm like, "Well, okay, so how's your organization going after you've implemented that stuff?" There's some bumps, there's some hiccups along the way. Of course, because you're also not getting feedback on how they're using the tools and you implemented it without asking them. So there's all of these issues around building culture. I think that, technology is not the answer. Yes, it's going to help us, but it's two sides of the coin. Yeah, we have to put the human side and the technology together.
Yeah. What is the greatest um, worry that you have for leaders who don't think about the um, downstream effects of implementing technology in a way that still holds on to those leadership skills that we need?
So I've actually thought a lot about this, and I have an academic paper coming out. And I don't know what I'm titling it yet. I've called it cognitive integrative leadership. I've called it the cognitive action model.
Mm.
But really, what the intent of this paper is, and what I really explore, is this need for leaders and organizations to think about sort of the epistemic elements of their organization. We live in an era of misinformation and disinformation, right? It's all over the place. And so, if we have that disinformation, how do we make decisions that are appropriate? Where do we get the information from? How do we scrutinize it? Where do we store it? How do we use it for decision making? And I think that's a really important part of leadership today, that I think there's a bit of a gap in sort of the leadership theory out there on that topic. And I think it's such a responsibility that we have as leaders, to be open, to be transparent about all of those things so that people really understand, the organization, and develop trust in the organization. I have a bit of a weird story, but when I was still working as a paramedic, I had a paramedic come up to me and say, "Oh, I did this really new sort of cool clinical procedure on somebody." And it was cardioverting a cardiac patient. But what they had done is they actually gone and they had read one research study that was kind of on the internet. I don't even think it was peer reviewed, and not, it was sort of like, predatory journal article.
Mm.
And they took that and they implemented it into their practice. And this is a long time ago. And even back then, I'm like, this is wrong, right? Like, we need to teach people like where this information is coming from, uh, how to evaluate it. Is it good? It's not for you to read one research paper and put that into your clinical practice, or to go read one paper that's on the internet or a TikTok video and implement it into your organization. Management of knowledge takes years, right? One research paper is a page, you put it into a book, and it's the book that, changes protocols, procedures, and how you do it. And so from a leadership perspective, I think those are some of the big issues that I see, and that's why I wrote the paper, that I think there's an added responsibility for leaders and organizations that we need to look at.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm hearing is um, that we are using all kinds of mechanisms like technology, like reading that one paper online from a predatory, journal, to as a shortcut to respond to highly complex systems, and it's just insufficient.
Yeah. I think that's what the the paper I wrote is saying, that we live in a very complex, we've all heard the term VUCA world these days, and how it's a bit chaotic. So how do you make decisions with clarity? How do you cut through all of that noise? But I think part of that, if you can do that as a leader, you are actually creating trust and in your organizations, and healthy organizations. And I think that's a really important aspect of technology. I know we're going to get into the law piece of this, but maybe it's a bit of a lead in. Right? We cannot keep up with the law as compared to the ethics of implementing tech, right?
Mm.
And I think that's a big concern for leaders, to function in an ethical way, not just with compliance, because compliance is lagging at the end of the day.
That's a beautiful way to segue. Yes. So you are listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Cam Stockdale. We just are starting to move into an ad break. The Hard Skills is sponsored by TowerScope, my leadership and team development consulting firm. You can learn more at gotowerscope.com. And you can find us right now live streaming on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, all over the place through talkradio.nyc. Otherwise, we'll be right back in just a moment.
Misalignment within your sales team or with the client stalls deals and creates unnecessary friction for you and the client, resulting in up to 37% lower win rate. If you're in pre-sales, sales management, or sales enablement, and you'd like to increase revenues, win rate, margins, client satisfaction, and stay competitive, this show is for you. Hi, I'm Art Fromm, host of the Making Seamless Sales Show. Please join me live Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marcanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to the Hard Skills. So if I am a leader trying to do right by my people, and I am trying to retain my high performers especially, and retain trust, psychological safety, high performance, the things that I know are going to lead to the best outcomes for my organization. We already know high performers do not just stick around for basic compliance, and they certainly don't feel good when they're micromanaged by technology or person. And so how can leaders think through this and put some plans together that are both legally compliant, but also think about the ethics in a way that, focuses on trust, focuses on what's important to people to perform at the highest levels? What are the things that you work with leaders on to start thinking through these things?
Yeah, there's something that served me well, and I have a very odd name for it, but this is back in my paramedic days, and it was, the ambulance service in British Columbia is quite large, right? BC is the size of like the state of California doubled, right? Very large area. And so I was responsible for sort of live operation of that at one time. And, when I was dealing with a complex issue, I always took a moment, I took a step back and I said, if the media ever got a hold of this, what would be the criticism, right? I put a different lens on it. Now, I called it the sniff test. I wouldn't walk around your offices and saying I'm doing the sniff test. But to have that moment, that pause where you can step back, put another lens on what you're doing, take a deep breath and slow down. I think that's ultimately important. When you're implementing technology into an organization, you have to involve the people that are going to use it at the end of the day. Don't do what I did with the project management software and say, "Oh, I'm going to implement it and it's going to work." Because if I had taken that step back before I move forward, I would have thought, I'm supposed to be this change management person, and I haven't involved anybody. I haven't looked at what people's values are in the system. And I think that there's an approach there that you can take at the beginning and the outset of implementing tech into your organization. And like I was saying earlier, I think that there's an ethical component to this piece, because if you don't do that, the potential negative impact on your staff is going to be severe, right? If you're suggesting to somebody that they have to use this tool and you haven't trained them well and it doesn't fit with their value system, and it's not the way that they want to work, are you creating a workplace environment for those people that actually functions? Is your high performer still going to be a high performer? The reason they're a high performer is because they figured out a way to do it themselves. They can take a shortcut, and they have their own shortcuts. They may not be missing out on stuff, but they've figured out a way to do the job that has created a high performer, and you've taken that away from them and handed them a project management tool. So respect your employees in that process. And I think that that's where I would start in this idea of implementing something.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's keep going with that example. Let's say you have a bunch of high performers. They've come up with their own unique way of doing things that works for them. They really love it. But you're really, committed to implementing this one technology solution. How do you navigate getting feedback that they don't want it and still implementing what you want?
I would really evaluate, and maybe it's just the way that you framed it, but why is it you're dead set on implementing this technology? That's the first question you have to ask.
Mm-hmm.
If you think that implementing it is, there are sometimes you have to implement new technology. Like you can't run an office now without having word processing or the capability of doing the internet, and I understand that. But if it's other tools that you're putting into place, again, take that step back, take a deep breath, and talk to people. I would much prefer a leader go and have a conversation with their staff and say, "What are you using? How do I make your job better by implementing tools? Like, what tools do you need? Do you have a level of expertise in this area that I don't?" It's interesting you mentioned that my bio, I had this sort of chair of the ILA role, and we've been running these leadership webinars with high profile healthcare individuals. And the thing that keeps jumping off the page to me is that each one of these very successful, very high profile, very accomplished people, they're humble. The first thing that they say in these interviews is that I don't know it all. And I learned if I was going to make a positive impact in the organization or in patient care at the end of the day, is I had to listen to people. And I think listening to the conversations and listening to your people is the first step in this process. They'll identify for you the tools that they can use to be much more efficient in organizations. And that's what happened with the Work Wellness Institute. I had an IT team and an education team that got together and said, we don't need this tool. We need this one. And frankly, it was a much better, much more elegant solution. And so that's where it starts at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I would add to that, that I really like this piece about the self-awareness part of why you're choosing to go in a direction. I've known leaders who have wanted to implement a technology because they were annoyed by some of the lower performers not doing what they need to do. But unfortunately, by implementing something that meets lower performer compliance, it alienates high performers, right? It's substituting actual management with technology, which is what kind of you were speaking to.
I think we always do that, right? We create policies for the lowest common denominator in organizations, right? I'm not sure if you've had a guest on here that have said this, but we've heard this before. Wouldn't we love to have a policy and procedure manual that said do the right thing? And that was it. But we create these booklets of policies for that person that, like, you're dealing with them every third day on a particular issue. The reason why you have a social media policy in an organization, or the reason why you have a policy on, workplace behavior, is because somebody violated that kind of trust in the organization before. And oh, no, I got to put it down on paper. But I think that this technology piece here is more than just a policy document at the end of the day and the way that you move forward with it, right? There's the human connection and there's the communication piece. And I'll keep going back to that again and again. Walking into a business and they say, hey, we just implemented this brand new toy in the organization. Look how wonderful it is. But then you ask them, okay, you expected performance and productivity by this new system. Is it happening? Well, it's only been 6 months and we haven't seen any improvements yet. I'm like, well, it's because you haven't done those initial steps. But we have this, fantastic policy manual that explains to everybody how to do it. Sort of missing the point a little bit, I think.
Yeah, and I think this is where we're looking at the difference between the legal or policy piece, the compliance piece, and the ethical piece. I'd love to hear more about that ethical piece, about what are a few of the things that leaders can be thinking about when they're considering more about the ethical side as compared to just the compliance policy legal side.
Well, think about the tools that we have in organizations, or you could implement. There are time trackers, completely illegal, but the implication of a time tracker on somebody is potentially quite severe. There was a paper that came out in 2024, the last one that I just read, Glavin and a number of authors. And they really looked at those tracking devices and the impact on the wellness and mental health of employees. And there was a definitive negative impact. Now, that's one of half a dozen studies I know on that topic. So if you think about it from an ethical perspective, you implement these time trackers and you know that you're damaging individuals' health and well-being in organizations. There's a move afoot now, for example, on things like biometrics, right? Employers have biometrics in organizations. The bar is now being set very high in the courts around when you're going to use biometrics, right? Because it's personal data. People have the right to know, etc. So even though if you're using it for valid workplace reasons, which you're allowed to do, should you be keeping that data? Right? Those are the kind of things that you need to think about. Employees have the right to have that data. How do you give them access to it? If they object to something that's contained in there, how do they actually get that off their file? Or, what's the security behind the data that's there? So, like I said, the courts are wading into decisions like that. But at the end of the day, you can't rely on the legal compliance piece to be a good employer.
Yeah. You're reminding me of an argument I was constantly having with my past employer around this time tracker. I had not thought about like the ethical implications of the time tracking, but what I used to argue with them about is if you have high performers who have been doing the work for a long period of time, you should actually see them spend less time rather than more time on the things that you're giving them as compared to people who are new at this, right? And so what that means is the less time I spend on this, I'm dinged for not doing a good job instead of getting rewarded for doing it faster.
Yeah.
And so, or rewarded for not having to do X, Y, and Z because I did it through ABC mechanism instead, right? And so that's another sort of like implication of maybe not ethical, but morale building also.
Yeah. I was going to say, it's like the plumber who's really skilled at their job. It takes me all day to fix the plumbing in the house, but they come in and it's 15 minutes and it's done, and probably done way better than what I could do it. So, yeah, you're right. There's this. To be honest with you, I hadn't even thought of it in that context. But you pay for expertise. Uh, in my world, I've done so many of these degrees, etc. I can write a paper fairly quickly now. I can't expect my staff to write, white papers or that kind of thing in the same amount of time. They don't have the skill set. So if you use the harvest tracker on me, you'd be like, well, how did you do that in that amount of time? So yeah, you're absolutely fundamentally right.
Yeah, yeah. So we are reaching another ad break, and I'd love to dig into kind of the flip to all of this. Can we use technology to build culture, to build trust, to in a way that is very like thoughtful, ethically? Is that possible in terms of just where you see the trends going? Or will it always take the human leadership element in order to manage the technology implications? So you are listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Cameron Stockdale, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
On Frank About Health, we're not just talking healthcare. We're managing disruption and innovation. Over the last 4 years, I've taken you from epilepsy and COVID to mental health, caregiving, and now the front lines of healthcare transformation. Stay tuned for a healthier future as we bring on the innovators, professionals, storytellers, and advocates who show you how to own your healthcare every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
Ready to serve up success with a splash? Hi, I'm Bruce Kramer, a.k.a. the Corporate Cockroach.
I'm the Renaissance woman, Angie Snowball.
And I'm your strategy doctor, Dr. Navtej Desange, inviting you to serving up success with a splash.
Join us as we shake things up with real talk and real strategies centered around awareness, action, and accountability.
And yes, there really is a cocktail involved. Please join us and sip your way to success.
Serving up success with a splash, where wisdom meets happy hours. Cheers!
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 You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills. So up until this point, we've talked a lot about us managing technology that we implement, all the things that we have to look out for, put in place, all those things. Is there anything that you see in terms of emerging trends, where workplaces are going, where technology could actually help us with trust building, with ethics decisions, things like that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's not that I hate technology. I just think you need to implement it with some forethought and some guidance. Uh, if you think about how we're working in a lot of workplaces now, it's democratizing the workplace, right? It's creating new ways and new relationships in organizations.
Mm-hmm.
The flattened hierarchy of an organization is a really good example of that. Now, I think that we don't want to get rid of all hierarchies. I mean, I think that the hierarchies and having a boss and somebody to report to and clarity of work, actually, people need that in many respects. But I think as a communications tool, technology certainly has the ability to do that for us. But if you think about the direction that the workforce is going, there's a lot of things that are out there that I think are going to be really interesting in the near future. Like, I think you're going to have digital colleagues soon. You're going to say to them, "Hey, do a marketing present or do a marketing report." Well, not are they going to be able to do the marketing report, but they're going to be able to deliver it. So I think what we're starting to see, and it's been tested in a few places I've been reading about, and they're talking about, okay, well, who's going to run that digital team? You need a digital boss of the digital team. And I think so there's kind of a unique world that's going to develop there. There's things like the digital twin, and I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
Digital twin is something really interesting. I went out, I was able to have a tour of the Vancouver airport recently. And you're sitting down at a chair and you look up at the screen and you see a picture of the airport, but you kind of look over and you look out the window and you see the same thing, right? So you can actually be sitting in your chair and get a live picture of what's happening in the system. And it's really good for looking at like pattern flow issues. So with all the sensors in the building, you can tell if the car is parked out in front of the airport and shouldn't be there. And the computer automatically calls for the tow truck, and there's no human intervention, and those kind of things can happen. So there's lots of stuff that's coming. And so I think that there's the opportunity to take advantage of those, talked about as a communication tool as one thing. It flattens hierarchies. Um, I think that AI, for example, is going to be used more and more. If you're transparent as a leader and you're open, because you're going to get checked every time. We've got a computer in our pocket that we're walking around these days, right? And every time you say something, somebody goes to Chat GPT or whatever other system that they're using and double checks what you're saying. I think that those are opportunities that we have to make a real and positive impact. Um, there's a negative side and a downside again to some of those things, but yeah, there's a door to walk through.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how AI can actually help us manage our own emotion regulation issues as humans. We get angry with people and we want to shoot that email out so badly with that, like tells them off and tells them how we're right and they're wrong. And it just makes things a million times worse. And now we have a buddy to say, I want to say this. I know it's bad. Can you help me remove the passion and emotion from this that will just insult and offend, and instead find a way to provide the feedback or maintain the connection and the trust that I'm aiming for? And I've known people to do that. I've done that when I've been really riled up, and it's been so helpful when we're in those moments. And I've been like fascinated by like, could this be an opportunity for some, maintaining trust when we're in the midst of conflict, tension, turmoil, things that erode our coping mechanisms, things like that.
Yeah, I've done the same thing. I've written a letter or an email and I've read it myself and I thought, ooh, I should probably change that. So you go to Chat GPT and you say rewrite more friendly, and that's much better. I'm not going to get myself into trouble. So yeah, absolutely, those tools are out there. It's interesting something you said though just then about turning to the internet for help and emotional regulation. We were discussing the topic at the Work Wellness Institute that you know does this go because there's a shortage of counselors and mental health professionals everywhere, right? So is AI something that's going to be, something that's going to be utilized in the future? What I thought was really interesting was that not right now, right? It gives you the very vanilla answers. It conglomerates all the data out there into something very vanilla. But I actually had a staff member that said, well, I've used it because I don't, I can't get access to a counselor. And they were using it for those to help themselves. So it wasn't just the rewrite using Chat GPT. And I've started working in an organization or helping them out a little bit that's really looking at utilizing online presence to deliver that sort of mental health care counseling perspective. Now we'll see if that takes off and works, but that there's another opportunity for the helping people and helping organizations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so many implications for this. So everyone, obviously, we could talk endlessly about this. But Cam, how can people find you so they could learn more about your work?
Well, you've got on the screen there, I think you're showing people, that's the consulting company that I started. So there's a contact page there that you can go through and I'll get a message from you. But LinkedIn is just as good. And then there's a couple of organizations that I work with. One is called Electrify, which is a very interesting organization. Electrify, I started working with them because it came out of the gig work research that I was doing. And this was all about financial security, financial education, and the impact on well-being that it had. So this, while it's fintech, it certainly has a lot to do with using AI to sort of set people up for success in the future and reduce some of that stress. So there's a couple of the organizations that I work with, and you can certainly reach out and talk to me.
Awesome.
Always willing to have a conversation with somebody about this content and this stuff. So
thank you. For those of you who are listening later, the company is CERTUS Consulting, certusconsulting.ca, because that's Canada, CA, okay? Cameron Stockdale is where you find him on LinkedIn. And Electrify is spelled ELEKTRAFI.IO. All right. And that will be also in the show notes anyway. So, folks, what did you take away from Cam? What's one small thing that you can implement this week from what you learned today? And share it with us on LinkedIn so we can cheer you on. You can find us on all the podcast stations. And if today's episode resonated for you, please share it with a colleague or leave a review. Thank you to talkradio.nyc for hosting. Thank you for joining me and Dr. Cameron Stockdale today on this journey. This is Mira Brancu signing off. Until next time, stay steady, stay present, and keep building those hard skills muscles. Take care, everybody.